Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lori Menico, President of Conceptual Communications, a Fort Lauderdale-based communications consulting and public relations firm, and your moderator for today's webinar. Our topic is the future of publishing public notices online and the new state statute HB 937 scheduled to take full effect July 2013. The DBNA Group is a consultancy of communications experts formed to help cities and other governmental entities create, manage, and distribute public information more effectively. I would like to start by introducing our panelists and team. With us today, we have Mr. John Flint, City Manager of Weston, Florida. Following the city's incorporation in 1996, Mr. Flint was appointed as the City of Weston's first city manager in July 1997. Weston quickly gained international attention for being one of the country's largest master plan communities and for the progressive form of contractual municipal management which Mr. Flint has instituted. Unfortunately, Mr. Ron Book, who is supposed to be joining us today, had a conflict arise at the last minute and can't be with us. We also will be hearing remarks from State Representative Rich Workman, Republican from Melbourne and primary sponsor of HB 937, as well as State Senator Nan Rich, Democrat from Weston, who is a strong supporter of the continued publication of public notices in Florida's newspapers. Our team this morning includes Marty Gould, Managing Partner of DBNA Group, as well as our Technical Coordinator, Liz Smiley. If you have questions as we progress through the presentation, please enter them through the question portal of your control panel, and Liz will read them in the order received a little later in the presentation. Now, on to this morning's webinar and the online future of public notices here in Florida. The debate and the big question in Tallahassee has been and continues to be identifying what is the higher priority, saving the taxpayers' dollars or keeping the public informed. Is there a way to do both? What kind of system achieves true cost savings while maintaining the public's trust and confidence? These were the major challenges facing Florida's legislators as they attempted to bring a 200-year-old principle into the 21st century. HB 937 is a product of compromise. Some would say too much of it due to the fact that paid public notice ads in local newspapers are still part of the law. We will explore the reasons behind how the new law was crafted and its implications for further changes in the coming years. The efforts to move public notices online initially began in 2009. Spearheaded by the City of Weston, I'd like to invite City Manager John Flint to provide us with an overview of these efforts. Welcome, John, and thanks for joining us. John,
Thank you,
please
Lori,
begin.
and welcome everyone who joined the webinar.
Thank you. Please begin by explaining to us what the primary motive was for trying to ultimately shift public notices online.
There were several motives to try to shift it online as more and more local governments set up their websites and got comfortable with them and were able to readily post items on there. We looked at this as why can't municipalities post their legal notices online as opposed to sending them to the newspaper? In sending them to the newspaper, it's become increasingly more difficult for local governments to get the ad space that they need, as the governments are essentially competing with the paid advertising that the newspaper is selling, and yet trying to be efficient with the space that they have to deal with. The other part of the problem is the declining circulation of newspapers as well. In 2009, the City of Weston put together a bill of general law to go to the legislature that would enable local governments to post their legal notices on their own websites and forego the traditional posting in a newspaper general circulation. That met with considerable resistance from the newspaper industry, and it met from some resistance from several state legislators, including Senator Rich. We tried to resolve some of those concerns by including in the bill a provision whereby the local government would have had to take out an ad in the local newspaper on an annual basis and allow people to register with the local government to have the public notices sent to them by first-class mail. That would have alleviated the cost of for someone to purchase a newspaper to find the ads. We weren't successful, obviously, in the 2010 legislative session, and Senator Dean introduced it in the 2011 session, and again, it didn't get too far. In the 2012 session, the Workman bill came through, and I think that's really quite different than what the local governments had in mind. Based on our research in 2009, 2010, Florida units of government were spending approximately $20 million on legal notices. After that first session in 2010, the legislature directed the Florida Legislative Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs, known as the LCIR, to actually do a survey of cities, and they pretty much came up with the same number. Had cities been able to post their own legal notices online, there could have been a potential savings of $20 million a year to the taxpayers of Florida. One thing that's really interesting about this is that nowhere else in Florida law are tax dollars mandated to support a for-profit business as they are with placing ads in newspapers, which is really kind of interesting for that. But that being said, I'm sure, Laura, you'll have a discussion on the Workman bill shortly.
Yes, we will. I wanted to prompt you to kind of give us some feedback on what sort of pushback you received in those years 09, 10, and 11, and did that change as you progressed, through each year from the newspapers? Because obviously this would have been a huge loss of revenue for them in an already declining print environment.
The pushback in the first year was substantial from the Newspaper Association. They were not happy with us at all, and there was some pushback on behalf of seniors because some thought that they didn't have access to internet, they didn't have computers or whatever. And I think some of the research from Pew has shown that seniors are becoming more and more tech savvy. Every year there's a greater percentage of them who are accessing the internet. And I think that's just coming with the aging of society and the ease of accessing the internet today. By the third year, the pushback from the larger newspapers had declined somewhat, and it appears that in the last year the greatest amount of pushback was from the smaller newspapers for two reasons. One, the obvious reason is the revenue generated by the legal notices, but two was being able to fill a paper with content and looking at the legal notices to generate other stories, which they could have pulled from the internet anyway to generate. But that was the feedback that we had gotten at the end of this session.
Okay. Did you, as going through this process for those 3 years, did you receive sort of an overwhelming support from some of the other cities, at least locally or statewide, or what was kind of your feedback from some of the other city managers regarding this?
I think we received a lot of support from cities. I think the League of Cities, I don't recall them taking a position the first year, but by this last session they did take a position supporting a change. So hopefully in the coming years, I really think it's only a matter of time till this happens as newspapers come to their resting place in their transformation in the next couple of years. I think that eventually we will get to just internet advertising. To count on newspaper circulation when you need it. If you look at New Orleans, the Times-Picayune, is no longer going to be a daily newspaper, and when Florida law requires that notices be posted so many days before certain actions happen, I think the laws were written counting on newspapers being published 7 days a week. I think when we see newspapers, whether it's the Times-Picayune or the Detroit Free Press, going down to less than 7-day-a-week publication, there are going to have to be some changes to accommodate some of these things and continue through the transformation.
Yes, well, certainly as things shift to a more online environment, I think it's common to ask the question, if, what is general circulation now? And that's part of this law that we're, looking at right now. And what does that mean in a world of declining newspaper circulation? Is that still really the best means of keeping residents informed? Are they more likely to go purchase a paper or go to the library to read a printed publication as opposed to using a library source if they don't have access to a computer to access that?
Well, I think we attempted to address that, and this was really through Senator Rich's efforts, that to provide an alternative means for those that don't have access to an internet or can't make it to a library or whatever, that people could get the public notices via first-class mailing. That is certainly an expense, but it's probably in the long run a lesser expense than the newspaper advertising. I mean, the numbers that large counties like Miami-Dade County spends on legal advertising are just huge. Obviously, smaller cities and less populated counties spend less, but nonetheless, if there's, I think we've got to look at also the return on investment as there's declining newspaper circulation. We're going to have to look at the statistics as to people receiving newspapers and people getting their information online, and as that tide changes, I think the law, so too, eventually will have to follow.
Well, thank you so much for that background. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us live and taking the time out of your busy day. If you are able to stay on with us to answer some questions in a little bit, that would be great. We're going to switch it now to the current legislation that we have in front of us. HB 937 was approved this past March and will go into full effect on July 1st, 2013. This bill was sponsored by Florida State Representative Rich Workman. Yes, he spells his name R-I-T-C-H, for those of you that are wondering. We had an opportunity to interview him earlier, and we'd like to play a portion of that interview for you now.
Just about the beginning of getting, when I was first elected in 2008, I run a bill to do away with our current public notice system, putting an attempt to free up tax dollars and do public notice more effectively versus just in newspapers, and kind of get rid of that monopoly and that cost. That bill will never pass the Florida House or Senate, for that matter. It is a very difficult bill to pass. There's a lot of jobs that would be affected. And the long story short, I realized even with a supermajority Republican House and Senate, I was never going to pass a bill that wiped out public notice in newspapers. For a lot of reasons, the newspaper lobby is strong. There is some truth, and some people believe strongly that you ostracize some folks, seniors and minorities in particular, that don't have access to the internet if you begin to post online. And one argument that's not true was that if you have, say, the clerks post their own information on their own website, who is watching the hen house? Well, the wolf is, or in this case, the clerk. Not to call them wolves, but you understand my point, is that if you have a city in charge of posting their own public notice, they're also in charge of fixing errors or disguising error, things they want to disguise. So there's a nice third-party element that takes place in the newspaper. So that was a winning argument on the other side the last year of the session. So I met with the Press Association, and I said, look, I'm passing a bill to reduce the cost and to put these things online. You'll either work with me or you're welcome to fight it, and we can get this passed, as I grew in power in the House. And so we came up with a concept of not doing away with public notices in the paper, but joining them with online access. I did do away with several different types of public notices, ones that were stupid, like if you're trying to find somebody who lives out of state, you're going to post it in Leon County, Florida. That's just wasting money and giving money to Jeanette, who has no paper in Leon. So we saved a couple $1 million by removing some public notices, but obviously not the big ones for the clerks. So what we required was that if any newspaper or any entity really posts or accepts revenue for posting a public notice, they must also in turn post it on their website for free. And they must have certain criteria. They must link to their opening page. They must have free and open access, not just to subscribers. And they must have a way to send emails if new public notices are published, if you opt into that service. It made us the first state in the nation to require public notices go online. Now, it doesn't do a whole lot. We did, by the way, reduce the cost of all second and third printing down to 85% of the original cost. That will help the clerks save money with their multiple prints. But it still requires newspaper, and it's still, the difference is now it's also viewable online. The concept is, as time goes forward and the papers become less and less prevalent in society, we already have a portal and a structure in place to do these things online. And as we go forward, you have to run these online. You know, if you don't have to have a large print shop with the capacity to pump out 10,000 newspapers daily, but you can do it online, you'll see that as we go forward and we shift from print to internet, competition will, of course, bring the cost way down. There's a fallacy that is used in these arguments that says we put them in newspapers so that people can, so everyone has access to them. Well, that's not true. I have 580,000 homes in Brevard County, only 90,000 subscribe to the newspaper. Far more than that have access to the internet. Now, I'm not arguing to take them out of the paper. My bill was clear. If you want to have effective, public notices, they can't just be in one source, and the one source is the newspaper. So we did away with that monopoly, put them out free online, and eventually, I think, and the papers I think would admit this, eventually we're going to move to an all online. The question was when, I don't know. At some point, when it becomes clear that public notices are nothing more than a subsidy to the newspapers, and that we are effectively touching no additional people or very few additional people that put in the paper, then we'll shift online. It could be years away or a decade away, but it's certainly not more than 10 years, I would say, before the newspapers themselves begin to go online. I mean, it's coming very soon. Even the honest newspaper folks will tell you that they know the day is coming when they're going to be online. And so, quite frankly, I've done them a favor. I've given them first place in who is going to control public notices when they're online. I don't believe for 1 second that when we change the law to go online, that we're going to say that newspapers will remain the monopoly, but they're certainly ahead of the game in the competition factor, right? I mean, now they're the ones doing it. So anybody else that comes on to compete will have to play catch up. I don't mind that. That's okay. They've done public notices for a long, long time. They can have a leg up. But at the end of the day, when it shifts, the only thing the state should be concerned about is the cost of the taxpayer, not the subsidy of the newspaper. So when that shift comes, whenever that is, if it's next year or 10 years, the key to the bill would be to make sure that it's free and open competition for companies to compete to publish public notices. The only caveat I'll add, in working with public notices, I will tell you what I would fight against is a statewide public notice website. I think that in order to have effective public notices, they must be published locally, whether that is in the paper, which is current, or on a local website. So you can see we have one company with 67 websites covering all 67 counties, but nonetheless, there has to be a means to say this is your local public notices. The newspapers for a long time have had a public notice website, and that was kind of they always use that as, no, we already publish online. Nobody goes to a statewide website to look up when the county commission meeting is in, Lafayette County. So I want to make sure that we sustain the local public notice practice while we shift it to online.
Okay, thank you from State Representative Workman. He clearly recognized the need to provide support toward moving public notices online. And while Senator Nan Rich, our next speaker, is a supporter of the current legislation, she is opposed to fully moving public notices online. And now we will hear a brief segment of her interview.
The last few years, actually, we've had bills filed that remove the requirements for publishing legal notices and other advertisements in publications that are printed and published at least once a week. There's a strong feeling among many of us that there are a lot of older, people, particularly seniors, where they get their information from the newspaper, and they don't have. Some of them don't have computers. They don't have access to internet. So it really would, eliminate a major source of information from them. So the bills that we've had have, as I said, have removed that requirement. So we, again, this year it turns out we did not end up doing that. The AARP has been very good at, providing information to the legislators to show that, where people, get their information from. And as I said, with the older citizens, it's really not primarily from the internet. I think things should be published where the most people get their information, and where it is, transparent. And certainly a newspaper that's published either, on a daily basis or once a week is much more reliable as far as people being able to, for government to ensure that people get to see the information and the hearings that are being published, the different items that are being brought forward before commissions, county commissions, city commissions, and so forth. So, yeah, I would definitely. I think it's pretty clear that as as the years go on, more and more people that as they get into their senior years will have had computers all their lives, and many people, as we know today, get we know from the the reduction of printed newspapers all throughout our country that at some point it may very well be that it is appropriate, but at this point I just can't agree to that. We haven't gotten to that point because we have too many people that are just that don't rely on or don't know how to use the internet or access the information on the internet. So as much as we kind of see the handwriting on the wall in terms of the movement in that direction towards the internet, it's not something that I think people are willing, or at least the majority of people in the legislature are willing to to say right now that this would be an appropriate way for people to get that information.
One final question, if I might, Senator. The argument that a lot of cities have made and why they've pushed for these kinds of changes is money, and the money that they're spending, taxpayer money. $20 million is what I was quoted in one source for the state of Florida. Is that a significant issue in your mind?
The most important thing for me is the ability for people to have access to the information, and I think it's worth the expenditure to make sure that residents do have that ability. And I think the idea of what happened this year in the legislature, where a bill that was presented to us, HB 937, did not eliminate the current requirements that public notices be placed in the newspaper, but what it did, and it turns out, unfortunately, that we didn't really know this because it came over, as I said, in that crunch of the last day, and bills come back and forth, and some of us are very, very cautious about what we support on the last day because you never know what's in it, because you really don't have a chance to read it. That bill was all right because it added the fact that websites of the newspapers would be able to to be used, but in addition to, not instead of the current requirement that the public notices be placed in newspapers.
We thank Senator Nan Rich for her commentary, and we're here at the crossroads. Clearly, the most important glaring factor is that cities have to keep the public informed, but at what monetary cost and at the expense and use of what resources? In order to better understand the current system and what the efficiency level is, we surveyed city clerks across the state. We'll be providing a complete copy of the survey results to all the participants on this webinar, but we wanted to highlight a few of the key results with you now. Marty Gould, on behalf of DBNA Group, will now lead us through some of them. Marty?
About 1/4 of the clerks are satisfied with the system as it is right now. That means that most of the clerks feel that some changes have to be made. More than 20% of you said that notices should be moved online and that all ads that are paid ads in the newspapers be eliminated as soon as possible. One of the biggest concerns that clerks have is timeliness. Almost 23%, almost 1/4 of you who responded said that timeliness was the most important factor in delivering notices. Informing the public and compliance with the law were also very important issues to a good deal of you. The least favorite aspect of public notices, more than half of you said the expense related to it, the cost of publishing and buying the ads. However, it is interesting to note that the biggest concern that clerks have about moving the notices online, as we've heard in the discussion today, 83% of you said that denying access for people who do not have computers is a primary concern to you about what would happen if all the notices were moved online, which brought up an interesting question for us. What percentage of the population has access to the internet? So we looked up the latest Pew study, and according to Pew, more than 200 million Americans have access to the internet from home, and that's about 75% of the population. And about 35% of Americans now access the internet on their smartphones or on other mobile devices. Now, access is not equal among all income groups. Lower income families are less likely to have high-speed internet in the home, but more likely to go online via their smartphones. So the question is, at what point will municipalities feel comfortable that most residents can access public notices solely through an online system? Everybody agrees it'll happen someday, but no one agrees on what percentage constitutes full access. So some of the other major findings that we concluded from the survey, besides cutting off access to certain residents, the next most important concern clerks have is that the new requirements in the law could wind up causing more omissions and errors. And we'll talk a little bit further about this in a moment. And ironically, while nearly all the clerks are concerned with the expense of buying public notice ads, we found that very few cities are negotiating with newspapers about ad rates, nor do they enter into bulk annual contracts, as most high-volume advertisers do, to get a lower rate. And finally, about 1/3 of all the clerks that we surveyed said that they were well aware of the new public notice statute. So that meant that 2 out of every 3 said that they wanted and needed more information, which is, of course, why we're holding this webinar today. So we hope that you come away feeling better informed at this moment. Lori, back to you.
Thanks, Marty. I'd like to now invite Marty back to provide us with a summary of some of the needs that must be addressed in order to improve the current public notice climate. Marty, back to you.
Okay, Lori. What we really think here is that HB 937 is a first step. Nobody really thinks that this bill is the final word on public notices. It's really the first step towards eventually moving notices out of the newspaper. And there really is no consensus yet on how to do it, or when, or on what basis to make the decision. The bill really puts the burden on the newspapers. That's the one thing that's really changed, that they have to create an online infrastructure in exchange for keeping the paid print notices. But we think this new process going forward is going to be a little awkward and inefficient, as newspapers have to move those notices from their classified ad systems and their display ad systems into their online display systems and then onto a state system. So we think that that's a perfect recipe for some errors and omissions and delays, because there isn't any one standard system that exists across the state. Every newspaper does it their own way. They've got different computer systems, and every clerk's office does it their own way. You know, even though the law really implies that there should be one system at this point. You know, finally, part of the problem is that the legislature had to put the burden on the newspapers because the cities are really behind the curve when it comes to their own online infrastructure. There are few cities with state-of-the-art display and search capabilities, and in fact, most cities do not consider public notices as an online function. The process is really geared almost entirely towards producing the print advertising. So we really, as we've been thinking about this, came to the conclusion that a revised public notice system should really contain three things and be focused on three areas. It should be easier and better for the public to increase their visibility and accessibility to notices. It should be easier and better for clerks' offices to operate by eliminating redundant production steps that lead to errors and delays. A new system should be easier for clerks, not more difficult. It should mean less work, not more. And finally, it should be less expensive for everybody. Unfortunately, House Bill 937 really doesn't achieve any of these objectives at this point. So the question is, what would the future look like? We see it as a single source cloud-based system for entering and distributing notices that could really achieve all of these goals, because a system like this would standardize entry procedures, allowing for dynamic search results across all categories. It would allow for notices to be entered into the system one time without any retyping. It would allow notices to be displayed automatically on any city or newspaper website with information specific to that city or county or geographic area. It would be able to automatically create the print ad, eliminating the time that it takes for newspapers to form the ad and then send it back to the cities to proof it before it's published. And it would allow newspapers to reduce the amount that they charge cities for those paid ads by relieving them of some of these additional infrastructure and labor costs. And finally, it would put cities back in control of demonstrating their ability to be transparent and accessible, which has certainly become a major issue in the debate in Tallahassee. So while House Bill 937 does not require any additional action on the part of the clerks, the responsibility for the public notices is still in their hands. We believe cities must become proactive to win over the confidence of citizens and state legislators by showing that they have the capability of meeting the technological requirements of making the notices universally accessible and usable online. Newspapers have been forced to take the first steps. We think it's time for cities and newspapers to work together to create a better system, the one that HB 937 envisions. Lori, why don't we send it back to you for some answers to some questions.
Thanks, Marty. Liz, just one final check here if we've received any questions in the wake of the results.
Yes, we have 5 questions. So the first one I have is, I was wondering if any clerks at the seminar had actually tried negotiating with newspapers for better results or better rates. Did we get an answer to that on the survey?
We found that only about 10% of the respondents said that they negotiate rates, and only about 8% negotiate bulk deals. So in that regard, we probably have 5 people attending right now, 3 to 5 people on the conference call who may have negotiated rates. If they have, it would be nice to hear from them in some way and to share their experience. Probably not today because we don't have enough time, but certainly if they kind of present themselves to us and let us know what they've been doing, we'd be happy to share that information with the rest of the group.
Another question is, would the online ads be required to meet the bilingual requirements as well?
Our reading of the bill does not address that issue specificity. The general requirements are that notices have to be in a publication of general circulation, and I think that they have left it up to cities to determine whether or not they need to publish in a bilingual manner in order to serve their constituents. Right now, in terms of the survey, we saw that that less than 10% of cities are publishing their notices bilingually. Most are only publishing in English at this time.
John, are you still with us on this call?
Yes, I am, Lori.
Did you receive any sort of, did you guys address this when it kind of first went through about the bilingual requirements?
No, we didn't, but there's really no reason that there shouldn't be some continuity from what Florida law states today as far as bilingual publications.
Mm. Okay. Liz, our next question.
There is a question about how to negotiate rates or book contracts with the newspapers.
Lori, let me
go ahead, John.
Take a stab at that. I think that that's a good idea that on a countywide basis, if that could be done. And I know municipalities in Broward County have joined together in a cooperative for certain purchasing, and we all purchase our fuels that way and several other things. And that's a platform that could be used to look at cooperative purchasing of newspaper advertising in a bulk format to attempt to get a better rate. I mean, one of the problems we've had in Broward is that one of the newspapers has been consistently less expensive than the other, so where's the competition? But I think if you put in the mix that if you take into account the Business Journal, the Sentinel, and the Herald and put out a bid for as many of the cities as would want to join the cooperative, if we got all 31 cities in the county, so there's 32 governmental entities, there may be some benefit in doing that, and that's something that either the clerks can take up to their association or the city managers through the Broward City Managers Association in Broward for that.
Marty, did you want to add kind of how that really gets structured in other industries for advertising as far as the negotiations go?
Yes, I think, and I think John's idea is a very good one. It certainly applies in the areas where there is more than one publication in the county, and that they could play off one against the other for negotiation. But from a newspaper standpoint, as somebody who's been buying and selling advertising for the better part of 30 years now, I can tell you that so much of what goes into the rate structure for public notices has a lot to do with the work that newspapers have to do to create those notices. Because clerks send a raw piece of copy, usually by email, to the newspaper, and then the newspaper has to design the ad and then has to send it back to the clerk for corrections, and then the ad finally gets placed. This is labor intensive. The two factors that go into rate negotiation for a newspaper are time and space. So if a client, any advertiser, can come to a newspaper and say, I guarantee to buy X number of inches in a year, 500, 1,000, 2,000, the rate structure is such that as you buy, obligate to buy more inches, the rate comes down. The other factor in this is time, which is if newspapers can be relieved of the burden of having to lay out the ad, they have more margin to reduce the rate. The third factor then, of course, is this combination that John talks about, is that if the thing is packaged up as a group, now there's more leverage if there's another paper, if you're going to have competitive bidding, and say, look, we're going to take all our notices and we're going to give them all to one publication. And then they have to bid on them, and they might definitely drop the rate. But I think that we have to solve the first two problems, which are operational from the clerk's point of view, which is A, you know what notices have to be run during the course of the year. They're pretty much the same on a year-in, year-out basis with some varying degrees. If you look back over your purchases and find out how many column inches you bought, and then you went to the paper and said, look, we will guarantee you that we will run X number of inches over the course of the next year, the chances are that they can allocate that space and make a determination of an adjustment rate. That would be the first place that I would look at for negotiating your own rate.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you, John, for your information regarding that question. Liz, do we have one more question or two?
They keep coming, so we.
Okay, let's keep going. We have a couple minutes left here.
What prevents the newspapers from raising their rates for first publications to cover the reduction in cost for second publication? Who is the watchdog to ensure advertising prices aren't going up?
John, you wanna take a crack at that first?
You know, we had discussed that. I discussed that with one of our attorneys after the law was passed, and you know, when the second ad is published, if you know that there's any change in it whatsoever, does it constitute? You know, to us it's a second publication, but to the newspaper, does it constitute a new ad because you know a date was changed in there or something? So I think that's something that local governments are going to have to be vigilant about, and just say, look, this is the second publication of this ad. Where's my 15% discount? And see what happens with the newspapers.
I should add to this two things, John. One is that all newspapers, nearly all newspapers, offer to all of their advertisers a discount for second and third publications. In some cases, that discount is far in excess of the discount that's mandated by the statute. So I mean, you should look at the rate card, the published rate card that the newspaper has. Every one of you should have a rate card from the newspaper to look at all the terms and conditions. There's no reason for any advertiser to be treated less fairly than another. You may find out that your discount rate is actually greater under the newspaper's own terms and conditions. The other issue is, which is again a quirk in the law, which I think was not addressed properly, and that is that the rates that are established by statute are based on a very, very old and very out-of-date system that newspapers no longer use. The statute specifies a certain number of cents per inch of ad, depending on the size of the market that you're in, anywhere from 40 cents up to 70 or 80 cents. An inch, which would be an actual inch, like a square inch. But newspaper ads are sold in column inches, which is a different measurement altogether. So they wrote a little tweak into the statute that said that the newspaper either charges you the rate that's in the statute, or if you're in a market where you have the ability to negotiate rates, that the newspaper can charge whatever you negotiate the rate to be. So the newspaper has an out to charge its rate card rate. I do not believe that the newspaper has the right to charge you above and beyond what the rate card is. But I also interpret the statute, and some people are going to have to look at it legally to say there may be a possibility that every city has the ability to negotiate a lower rate based on terms and conditions. But I think you should all have rate cards, and you should be looking at what the other terms are that you get into your local newspaper. Some may be offering a discount of as much as 50% for the second and third printing of the ads.
And Marty, on that note, I have someone asking a question. What is the statute that regulates the cents per inch? And also, how many newspapers are there in one area?
I tell you what, when we send out our information to everybody this afternoon, I will include a summary of the bill with the statute number, which I can't quote off the top of my head, and if I click off my computer now, I'm going to screw up the webinar. But I'll get the statute number. It was written back in the 1940s and has been modified several times, but it is an old statute. The second part of the question, Liz, with regard to more than one newspaper?
How many newspapers are there in one area?
It varies. You know, some smaller counties may only have one paper of general circulation, but the definition of general circulation is very broad. It means a paper that's been in existence at least a year, and that seems to be. It can't be a shopper. It has to have real news content. But other than that, it could be just about anything. So while you can't just open up your own newspaper tomorrow to print public notices, it could be different in different counties. Some counties may have only one newspaper to be able to work with. In South Florida down here, we have several who cover multiple counties. The smaller the market, the less options you have, I believe.
And the last question, if local papers require subscriptions to read publications online, should cities be exempt or negotiate a rate for that service as well?
John, do you want to take?
That's John's.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic. A lot of newspapers are putting paywalls in now. The New York Times put theirs in several months ago. The Arizona Republic is starting this month. And if you recall, when the Herald, Miami Herald first showed up online, that they wanted you to register each time you went in, and that didn't work out too well, and they stopped doing that. So I think the public's tolerance for paywalls is really in the testing mode to see. And the New York Times went from 20 articles per month down to 10 because they were getting people subscribing and they felt they could have that reduction. But I think the New York Times is unique in that area. It's going to be interesting to see the results of how the Sentinel's doing since they started their paywall a couple of months ago, and how people find their way around the paywalls to still get the content. And it's possible that when we, as we transition into online ads and away from print ads, I would expect to see in the legislation that you can't have to pass a paywall to view legal notices, that they're going to have to be accessible without a paywall. So I think this is evolving and something we're going to have to watch and see where it settles, but I think it's going to happen a lot quicker than any of us may expect or predict.
Well, thank you, Marty, and special thanks to Mr. John Flint for joining us live this morning, and of course to State Senator Rich and State Representative Workman for their interviews. And thank you to all of you out there who attended online with us. We will be sending each of you a copy of the full survey via email later today. Please feel free to share it with your city managers and elected officials. We will also be posting this entire webinar so it can be viewed by anyone who missed it. We've had a few requests for this, so we'll be sure to get that out there. We'll send you a link to that video file when it's ready, and we invite you to forward it to your fellow clerks and anyone else you think might benefit from viewing it. If you'd like DBNA Group to come speak at your County Clerks Association or speak at a future meeting, we'd be happy to make a presentation. You can reach Marty Gould directly at 888-224-9888 or by email at the address on your screen. Thank you all for attending this morning, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.